Did general manager Brandon Beane build a roster in 2023 that had the capacity to win the Super Bowl? Well, we're going to put every decision that he made under the microscope today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Well, folks, speaking of getting started, we're going to get started with our performance review series. I am going to put it all under the microscope and be brutally honest with you on everything that happened with the 2023 Buffalo Bills. And we're going to start this conversation with Brandon Beane, and at the end of this entire series, we're going to end this conversation with Brandon Beane. And we're going to start by basically asking ourselves the question, did Brandon Beane deliver a roster to the coaching staff that had the capacity to win the Super Bowl? And with the resources that he had, how did he maximize that opportunity? And at the end of all of this, as we critique and grade and evaluate all of this, we're going to create Brandon Beane's checklist for the 2024 offseason. So buckle up. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff here today and in the coming weeks on Locked On Bills. So I want to start by looking at the subtractions, the players that were not retained from 2022 going into 2023. I want to talk about the extensions that he handed out. We'll talk about veteran free agent additions, the NFL draft, and then we'll kind of get to what he nailed and where he missed, right? That's kind of what this is all going to boil down to. But when you look at the subtractions, players that were not retained, the big one here is Tremaine Edmunds. Tremaine Edmunds, an expiring contract, and he left for a 4-year, $72 million deal with the Chicago Bears. And that looks like a great decision for Brandon Beane to let him go. And it's not that Tremaine Edmunds isn't a good football player and that he's not a nice piece for the Chicago Bears. But for the limited resources that this football team had last offseason, tying up money into Tremaine Edmunds, as opposed to rolling with Terrel Bernard, he made the right choice there. And on top of that, the Bills are going to get an extra third-round pick this year in the draft as a compensatory pick for allowing Tremaine Edmunds to walk and not, putting themselves in a position where they signed a bunch of players to offset it. So that looks like that's a big win for Brandon Beane. Now, one thing I should say is that in this entire conversation about who he let go and who he added, remember, the Bills entered last offseason a lot like they do this offseason, over the salary cap, had to make moves to get cap compliant, and so just not a lot of resources available to really add to the roster. So that's important to keep in mind as we work through this conversation. The other player that he let go that I think was pretty notable, and this is just an expiring contract, that walked and signed with another team, and that's Devin Singletary. Went to the Houston Texans, a 1-year, $2.75 million deal. And Devin Singletary had a great season for the Texans, wound up being their lead running back. And of course, it didn't start off that way. It started off as Dameon Pierce, a young player that had showed some promise as a rookie, and Devin Singletary just took the job from him and never looked back. And he wound up having, another season of over 1,000 yards from scrimmage and was a dependable player for the Houston Texans. Now, I don't look at the Bills running back situation and feel like they missed Devin Singletary, but that's a good football player, right? I mean, you can have whatever opinion you want about Devin Singletary, but he's a good football player that went to Houston, was a starter on a division champion playoff team that won a playoff game, was a big reason why they had the success that they did. And so I don't know that there's any regrets for letting him go, but he certainly went on and had a good season. A few more players of note here. David Quessenberry wound up being a swing tackle for the Minnesota Vikings. I don't think the Bills missed anything there. Greg Van Roten, backup interior offensive lineman for the Bills last year. He went to the Raiders And he was like a pretty good starter for them all season long. Now, again, the Bills didn't miss him. I think the interior of their offensive line was outstanding, including the depth, but another player to be mindful of. And then Case Keenum, the Bills let him walk in free agency, and I don't think the Bills missed Case Keenum. And so I think those were good decisions, in addition to releasing Isaiah McKenzie, freeing up a couple $1 million in cap space. And McKenzie had a very modest role with the Colts, and by the end of the season, he was kicked off the team. So I think when you look at the players that Brandon Beane said no to, I don't know that any of them were missed. While some of them went on to have good seasons in Tremaine Edmonds and Devin Singletary and Greg Van Roten, I don't think you looked at the Bills and said, things would have been different if they retained those players. If anything, I think it unlocked a lot of young players in Terrel Bernard, in Osiris Torrence, in James Cook, right? So I think he did a good job managing the players that he was not able to bring back. Now, when you look at the extensions, the big extension that was handed out was Ed Oliver, 4-year, $68 million contract. Looks like an absolute home run. An absolute home run. If Ed Oliver had the season that he did this past year and played on the 5th-year option, I don't want to say I guarantee you, but I, with a lot of certainty, would tell you that Ed Oliver would sign a contract extension with some team, hopefully the Bills, that would pay him well north of $20 million a season. And the Bills got him for what, $16 million a season? It's looking like an absolute steal. And so that was a good job of trusting your instincts on what the player could be and forecasting it forward. And again, whenever you give out a contract, you're paying for future production. And so far, this looks like an absolute home run for Brandon Beane. Another sneaky contract extension that he handed out that I think some people have forgotten about was Matt Milano. Gave him a 2-year, $28 million contract extension. And unfortunately, Matt Milano got injured this season in week 5, but certainly looked like he was going to have another all-pro caliber season and pair with Terrel Bernard to give the Bills one of the best second levels in all of football. I think that's a good extension. I don't think you can count on him having the tibial plateau fracture against Jacksonville, but that's unfortunately what happened. Sam Martin was given a 3-year, $6 million contract extension. I think Sam Martin's a good NFL punter, and he's paid, very average money. I don't think that's hurting the Bills in any way, shape, or form. Here's one that's pretty debatable. Tyler Bass gave Tyler Bass a 4-year, $20 million contract extension, and Tyler Bass rewarded the Buffalo Bills with the worst season of his career. Just how it is, right? I mean, a dreadful postseason, just a terrible postseason, middle of the season slump, and our confidence level is not very high in Tyler Bass going into next season, as he's now one of the highest paid kickers in the NFL. So that's not looking good right now. And hopefully it matures and it looks great, but right now, got some questions about that one. Then he was able to sign some other players to very modest contract extensions. Tyler Medikevich, 1 year, $2.5 million. Dane Jackson, 1 year, $2 million. Tyrell Dotson, 1 year, $2 million. Cam Lewis, 1 year, $1.2 million. Shaq Lawson, 1 year, $1.4 million. Jordan Phillips, 1 year, $3 million. I think all of those deals were very low costs for guys that were very important depth players for your football team. All of those guys, Jackson, Dotson, Cam Lewis, Medikevich, Phillips, Lawson, those were all good depth players for the Buffalo Bills. I think that was a good group of players to have back for, a very modest contract that was not prohibitive in your other moves that you made to build your roster. The other one of note here, Jordan Poyer. The Bills were able to re-sign Jordan Poyer last offseason, 2 years, $12.5 million. I think that's a good deal, right? I think there was some thoughts out there that Jordan Poyer was looking for the Harrison Smith contract, and the Bills got him for a major, major discount to that, and they certainly let him test the market, and he came back with a very, very, very modest deal. And the Bills could keep Jordan Poyer this coming season, or they could let him go and free up a bunch of cap space, but I think that was a good contract extension as well. So looking across the board of the contract extensions, it looks really good in addition to the subtractions. So as we start this conversation in terms of who he kept and who he let walk within players that were on the team the previous season, it looks like he did a great job. Now, the one question mark right now is Tyler Bass. And let's hope that the rest of this 4-year contract looks a whole lot better than it did this past season. All right, in just a moment, we're going to talk about the veteran additions, the free agent signings that Brandon Beane made, in addition to the NFL draft. So stick with me. We're going to break that all down for you here in just a moment. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Look, if you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. What do I love most about Super Bowl Sunday? I love the football. I'm here for the foot. People talk about the food, the commercials. I want to watch the AFC champion play against the NFC champion in the highest stakes imaginable. That's what I love about the Super Bowl. And look, FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. And guess what? New customers got a great deal here for you. New customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, folks, let's shift our attention to the free agent additions that Brandon Beane was able to make. And again, very small amount of cap space. And I think he did a pretty solid job of being able to add to this football team despite those circumstances. And the big name, the big ticket that he handed out was Connor McGovern. 3-year, $22 million contract to come over and be the Bills' starting left guard. And I thought he did a really nice job. Is he an above-average starter? No, I wouldn't say that. But he's a sufficient level starter. And when you look at the Bills' guard play over the last 6 years prior to this one, it has been a revolving door of crap. I mean, candidly, that's what it's been at the guard position. So for Connor McGovern to come in and stabilize that left guard position, I think was huge. And I think that's a big reason why Deion Dawkins was able to have the season that he had. And I think the big reason why we look at this Bills offensive line in general and say, you know what, that's the best it's been yet under Sean McDermott. I think Connor McGovern was a big piece of that. And so a very modest deal, 3 years, $22 million. I think that was a nice contract to hand out, and shoring up the middle of that offensive line is never a bad idea. I think that was a good one. Also, David Edwards was signed 1 year, $1.7 million, played a ton of snaps as a utility offensive lineman, provided depth at left guard and right guard. Obviously didn't have to play any right guard because Osiris Torrence took every single snap. But David Edwards was a very useful sixth offensive lineman that played a ton on game day and was a bargain for 1 year, $1.7 million. I hope they can get him back again for that. Taylor Rapp, 1 year, $1.7 million. Was he my favorite player this year? No, but he played a lot of snaps. It allowed the Bills to go 3 safeties, allowed them to put Jordan Poyer down on the second level to mask some of the coverage issues that you had when Matt Milano got injured. And he played a lot of football. And look, what he did against Miami in the AFC Championship game, AFC East Championship game, speaks for itself. And so I think Taylor Rapp, for that money, you can't possibly be upset with that. I think that was a good signing. Latavius Murray, 1 year, $1.3 million. I know he wasn't everybody's favorite player by the end of the season, but he was very valuable early, provided pass protection ability, and was a fairly regular piece of this offense, again, on a very small contract, and provided leadership. Kyle Allen is a backup quarterback, 1 year, $1.2 million. Once again, we did not have to watch the Bills' backup quarterback do anything meaningful, and that's great. And it's nice to know that the Bills had somebody, but didn't have to pay them very much. And so I think that's a perfectly reasonable backup quarterback situation for this Bills football team. Here's one that might be questionable. Deonte Harty, 2 years, $9.5 million. The Bills can get out of that contract and save a bunch of cap space. I think they probably will. But at the end of the day, Deonte Harty, while he didn't really have much of a role on offense, he handled the punt return duties, had the huge punt return against Miami, had a couple of big catches down the stretch, not a lot of volume. So I don't love what he gave you for that contract, but it's not like he didn't have a role. But I don't think you'd look at this contract right now and feel like it's a bargain. Damian Harris, 1 year, $1.7 million. Didn't do much, right? Got injured with the neck deal, was out for the season. Low-cost player. I don't think it hurts you that he wasn't able to do more, but a good veteran player that I think was worth 1 year, $1.7 million. Trent Sherfield, 1 year, $1.7 million. I had higher hopes for Trent Sherfield to be like a meaningful depth receiver, and if anything, he turned into be a disappointing depth receiver, right? And even when he had opportunities, the inconsistency was just too much. And yeah, he blocked a little bit. He played a little special teams, but I was hoping for a lot more out of Trent Sherfield. But again, the other side of the coin is we're talking about 1 year, $1.7 million. So played a lot of snaps for you, didn't give you a whole lot in return for it, but you also didn't give him much money. Poona Ford, 1 year, $2.25 million. I thought when Poona played, he was pretty good, but he didn't really convince this coaching staff that he needed to be an active player on game day, right? For the most part, he was inactive. And so is this a miss? I don't know, maybe, but I don't know that it's Poona's fault. He just didn't get a lot of opportunity, and we can debate that, and I wish that he did. But he was a nice depth player, and I wish he had more opportunity. I think that's the book there on Poona Ford. They signed Leonard Floyd, 1 year, $7 million, led the team in sacks with 10.5. The first double-digit sack guy for the Bills since like Lorenzo Alexander in 2016 or something like that. So I think you can be really satisfied with what Leonard Floyd gave this football team as a late signing, right? And there was this group of veteran free agent pass rushers that were available, whether it was Leonard Floyd or Justin Houston or Melvin Ingram or Jason Pierre-Paul or Yannick Ngakoue. And very clearly the right one for the one that did anything good was Leonard Floyd. And I think that was a home run signing, all things considered. Do I wish he was a little more impactful down the stretch? Yeah, of course I do. But I think all things considered, 10.5 sacks, some big games, particularly early on. I thought Leonard Floyd was well worth that. And then Jermaine Ifedi coming in and being your swing offensive tackle, never really had to play, but he at least checked that box. So you look at these additions, all things considered, not a whole lot of resources. I thought Brandon Beane found a lot of value in low-cost players, and his big ticket, Connor McGovern, really helped stabilize this offensive line. I think this is a pretty solid group. You can wish you had a little bit more out of some of these players, but for what you paid them and the roles that they filled, I think there's a lot more good than there is questionable here. How about this NFL draft? First round pick, Dalton Kincaid, picked 25 in the first round, moved up 2 spots, gave up a 4th round pick. I really love what we saw from Dalton Kincaid. I love how his role expanded throughout the course of the season. What do you have? Like the 4th most catches ever for a rookie tight end, the 10th most yards ever for a rookie tight end, became the number 2 weapon in this passing offense down the stretch. In a lot of ways, did exactly what I hoped he would. And I think he has a lot of potential to be a big time star for this team moving forward. I think that's looking like a good first round pick. Second round, pick 59 overall, Osiris Torrence comes in, plays every snap at right guard, and pairs with Connor McGovern to finally solidify this guard situation. I think that's an absolute slam dunk of a second round pick. And while Osiris certainly had some bumps along the way, you expect that for a rookie, and I think he's going to be so much better prepared for next year with a season under his belt. And this entire offseason, he's going to be spent getting ready to play right guard for the Buffalo Bills, as opposed to jumping vertical jumps and broad jumps and 40-yard dashes and interviewing and all the crazy stuff that you do as a prospect. Third round, pick 91, Dorian Williams. And folks, Dorian Williams didn't have a huge role this year, right? He was a depth linebacker, played special teams. But I think this is going to be a really important player for the Bills defense moving forward. And it's not because I think he's going to take away Matt Milano's snaps or he's going to take away Terrel Bernard snaps. But I think the way the NFL is going, and you're seeing more 12 personnel, more 13 personnel, more 21 personnel, a lot of tight ends involved, you're going to be playing base defense a lot more. And I think Dorian Williams is going to be an important X factor for this defense. You're seeing some teams start to play more and more linebackers. Look at the Chiefs. The Chiefs play 4 linebackers. Nick Bolton, Drew Tranquill, Leo Chenal, Willie Gay. They all play and have meaningful roles. Look at the Detroit Lions. They play a bunch of linebackers, whether it's Derek Barnes, Alex Anzalone, Jack Campbell, Malcolm Rodriguez. They play a bunch of linebackers. And I think this is a thing. I think you have to be able to do this. And Dorian Williams is going to give the Bills that third linebacker to come in and allow them to play some base defense. And what you have coverage-wise from Bernard and Milano, I think is going to free up Dorian Williams to shoot gaps, to serve as a spy, to do a lot for this defense. And so the rookie impact might not have been there, and maybe you wish that it was, given the injuries the Bills had at linebacker. When I project this thing forward with Dorian Williams, I get pretty excited. That's a fast, physical dude. Made a ton of full-speed mistakes. but I think there's a nice role coming for him and an important role for the evolution of the way that football is trending right now. And then you didn't get anything from the rest of your draft picks. Justin Shorter, injured reserve all season long, very rigid player that looked like he needed a lot of work in preseason. Then they pretty much shut him down with a hamstring injury for the whole season. Got a 21-day window to practice later in the season, never activated him. We'll see what he can do next year. And then two guys, Nick Broker and Alex Austin, didn't make your team, and they were on other teams all season long. Alex Austin actually spending time with the Patriots later in the season, actually picked off Josh Allen in that game. So you didn't get anything from your later picks, but I think your first three in Kincaid, Torrence, and Williams, I think that's got a chance to be three really impactful players for you. Two potential like impact starters in Kincaid and Torrence, and then Dorian Williams, who I think is going to be critical for the Bills to evolve defensively in the ways that they need to. So it's going to be, I'm excited to see Dorian Williams. I really, really am. All right, I want to reflect on one more move here. In-season moves, the Bills traded for Rasul Douglas. Rasul Douglas and a 5th-round pick for a 3. Somebody call the cops because the Packers got robbed. I mean, that's an absolute gem of a trade for the Buffalo Bills. I think Rasul Douglas's arrival coincided with the Bills kind of figuring it out on defense after a really rough stretch against some bad offenses. Made some huge impact plays, took away the football, and now we're very excited about what Rasul Douglas and Christian Benford can be next year. And to only give up a 3 while getting back a 5, hat tip Brandon Beane. I mean, just an unbelievable job. Also signed Linval Joseph, wind up being an okay addition. So I think the draft went really well, and I think your veteran additions went really well. So all things considered, it does, to me, I think Brandon Beane gave this team in so many ways what it needed to be successful in 2023. All right, in just a second, we're going to tie a ribbon on all of this. We're going to bring this to probably the most important part of our conversation where we really identify where he nailed it and where Brandon Beane missed the mark. So be sure to stick with me. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your number one ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at all the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, let's bring this to a close and reflect on where he nailed it and where he missed it. This is where I think Brandon Beane nailed it. And I'll start with the offensive line. I already talked about the stabilization of the guard play with the free agent signing of Connor McGovern and the drafting of Osiris Torrence. I think you've got your guard situation figured out finally. And I spent a lot of time last offseason and in previous offseasons talking about if there's a big black eye on Brandon Beane's resume, it has been the guard position. Just swing and misses and whiffs just everywhere. No stability whatsoever. Figured it out. And so that plus believing in Spencer Brown as the right tackle. And really, what did he do? He signed Brandon Shell, who winds up retiring during training camp. Wind up having to sign Jermaine Ifedi at the buzzer to have a swing tackle. You develop Ryan Vandemark. But believing in Spencer Brown to realize his potential was huge. And you didn't have to tie up a bunch of resources there that, at the end of the day, with the benefit of hindsight, would have been completely unnecessary. So I think he nailed the offensive line. Getting those two guards and believing in Spencer Brown. I think he also nailed linebacker. Letting Tremaine Edmonds walk and believing in Terrel Bernard while also having Tyrel Dotson back as a depth player. I think he crushed it. And those were the two biggest questions so many people had going into 2023. Right tackle, middle linebacker. We are no longer concerned about middle linebacker and right tackle. And it's not because Brandon Beane went out and did all these crazy aggressive things to fix it. He just trusted the development of young players in Terrel Bernard and Spencer Brown. Looking pretty smart for that. I think he absolutely nailed the Ed Oliver extension, getting him for $16 million per season. Again, if that contract gets done this offseason, north of $20 million per season. No doubt in my mind. No doubt in my mind. That's looking pretty doggone good. And then I think he also nailed these low-cost bargains. And Brandon Beane said during his press conference, his end-of-year press conference, talking about free agency, and he said, look, excuse me. He said, look, we're going to be shopping at the same stores we did last offseason. And those stores produced Connor McGovern and Taylor Rapp and David Edwards and Latavius Murray and Deonte Harty and Trent Sherfield and Leonard Floyd and Poona Ford. And again, like maybe you're not sitting here saying, wow, Joe, those are amazing players. He didn't have the money to go sign a bunch of amazing players, but to get that much volume of talent to come in and fill meaningful roles, right? Not every player's Josh Allen, right? Like it's not the case. Not every player's Rasul Douglas, high impact players. You got to have a top to bottom roster. As you saw this year, the depth of this roster was stressed in unbelievable ways. So yeah, you got to have your Josh Allens and your Rasul Douglases and your Terrel Bernards and your Matt Milanos, but you also have to have your Taylor Rapps and your David Edwardses and your insert Leonard, whatever player. They're all important. And I think Brandon Beane given just not having a whole lot of cap flexibility at all, to be able to still find veteran free agent additions to help this football team was outstanding. Not to mention Dane Jackson, Cam Lewis, Shaq Lawson, low-cost players that you brought back. I thought he did a great job with the bargain bin, and he's going to have to do a great job with the bargain bin once again. Now, hopefully he can find a starter like a Connor McGovern, right? Hopefully you can find another Connor McGovern type player, another Leonard Floyd type player. Maybe you do a little bit better with your Deonte Harty type investment, but you're going to need a bunch more of these guys back on these 1 year, $1.77 million contracts. Now, where did he miss? I think there's two things that stand out to me. One is wide receivers. I talked about this coming out of that Chiefs loss and using Brandon Beane's own philosophy, right? In that elimination game, you find out, what your biggest problems were. They're revealed in that game. And I talked about it at length. It was defensive injuries. It was wide receiver talent in terms of explosive down the field ability. We talked about special teams and impact defensive line play. And the wide receivers stand out to me because he made some choices here. He chose to continue to believe in Gabe Davis as a wide receiver too, and didn't do anything to get ahead of it, right? So we're I don't know. I feel like I've talked about this for 3 years now, but there's not been anything done to get ahead of it. Drafting Khalil Shakir in the 5th round, okay. I think that's more of a slot player. But we're sitting at this. We're kind of like right up against it. You better find a wide receiver too, because I don't think it's Gabe Davis, and that's cost you now 2 years in a row. Thinking that 2 years ago that he can go from a depth receiver into a meaningful number 2, and then this past season for him to show you what he showed you last year and believe that it would be different this year. I think that was a miscalculation. And then you go out and you get a couple of veterans, and again, you didn't invest much in Trent Sherfield and Deonte Harty, but they also didn't give you much. I was hopeful that they could have these nice little niche roles and make a few plays here and there, and that didn't really happen. And so not only did all of this feel like it was a big miss to me, but you're back in the same boat this offseason. And you better figure that out. You better find that wide receiver too. The bargain bin receivers that you bring in, you got to get more. You got to get more out of those guys. The other stuff for me is hard to really pin on Brandon Beane. You talk about defensive line play. Well, his answer for that was Von Miller. And Von Miller was everything Brandon Beane signed him to be for whatever. It was 10, 11 games before he tears his ACL. Tries to come back middle of the season. Just never happens. So yeah, it's frustrating that we're once again in a playoff elimination game wondering where the heck the defensive line is. But your big ticket, right? Your $20 million a year pass rusher that's going to the Hall of Fame one day. He got hurt. It's unfortunate. Leonard Floyd, I mean, it's not like he didn't rest on his laurels. He still got Leonard Floyd and still brought in a Poona Ford, and there was things that he did, but at the end of the day, I mean, the defensive line impact just wasn't good enough when it needed to be at its best. And then special teams, right? Like we talked about the Tyler Bass deal, but also like just covering kicks and punts, it just wasn't as good as it typically has been. And I think a part of the issue there is the defensive injuries that you had. And, Matthew Smiley he's left to coordinate these units with whatever players are available to him. And on a weekly basis, that changed so much based on availability. So I never think that Matthew Smiley got the opportunity to really have any level of consistency with the players that he needed to. Now, maybe you could say, well, you had Saron Neal, you had Tyler Medikevich, and those guys weren't, really what they typically are. So I think some of that, you could put on Beane, but I think it's also a consequence of just the overall injuries that they had and that creating an inconsistent cast of players for Matthew Smiley to work with. So at the end of the day, ending with the question that we started with, did Brandon Beane build a roster capable of winning the Super Bowl? And I think he did. Once again, I think he did. This team had the capacity. I mean, they lost to the Chiefs by 3 points in the playoffs? Had every opportunity to win the game. Now, they didn't win the game, so you can look and say, well, if this was different or this was different, okay, you can do that. But did they have the capacity to win that football game? The answer to that is absolutely yes. So I think Brandon Beane did his job. And there's an overwhelming amount of, yeah, that worked out compared to, well, yeah, you wish that could have been different. I think he built a Super Bowl caliber roster once again. And he's going to have to get back to the drawing board and get creative to try to do it once again, because once again, their resources are limited. He's going to have to create cap space. He's going to have to win in the bargain bin free agency. He's going to have to find a couple of big-time contributors in the draft. But if you want to be encouraged about that happening, look at what just happened this past offseason, and hopefully he can have similar success. All right, folks, there you have it. We've evaluated Brandon Beane, and next up, we're going to evaluate the coaching staff. We're going to talk about Sean McDermott, Joe Brady, Matthew Smiley, the development of players, all of that here on our next conversation. So don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.